Iran was choosing its next supreme leader, and at that exact moment, the building was hit. Not a base, not a missile site, not a convoy. A place tied to the constitutional process that decides who leads the Islamic Republic. And if that detail doesn't make your stomach drop, it should, because it signals something bigger than another strike. It suggests a war shifting from destroying capabilities to disrupting a state's ability to function. This is day 5, and day 5 is the day this conflict stopped looking like a campaign with a clear beginning, middle, and end, and started looking like a confrontation with no obvious ceiling. Tonight, Tin Viet is going to walk you through what happened over the last day, why it matters, and what the next moves could look like militarily, politically, and economically, because this story is moving faster than any normal news cycle can keep up with. And I'm going to be careful with wording here. Some of these claims are circulating as reports and official statements, not facts confirmed by every independent source. In a war, information becomes a weapon. So we're going to focus on what the narrative is trying to achieve and what the strategic implications would be if the reported events are accurate. Let's begin with the most extraordinary part of day 5, the strike connected to Iran's succession process, the strike that targets a constitutional mechanism. In the Islamic Republic, the supreme leader isn't just a powerful figure. He is the axis around which the state rotates. The military, the courts, the security services, and the political system ultimately orient around that office. So if the supreme leader is dead, whether confirmed or claimed, the next question becomes urgent and dangerous. Who replaces him? Iran's constitution establishes a mechanism for this: the Assembly of Experts, a body of senior clerics with the legal authority to select the next supreme leader. It's not a group that meets every week. It's not a parliament that votes on daily bills. Historically, it has had this role in a decisive way only in rare moments, most famously when Ayatollah Khomeini died and Ali Khamenei was selected. That's why the reported strike tied to a meeting, location, facility, or process linked to this body is so significant. Because if you disrupt a leadership transfer in wartime, you aren't just taking out a building, you're interrupting continuity. You're forcing a leadership vacuum to become something worse, a leadership paralysis. And the psychology of that matters. In a conventional conflict, you hit air defenses, command centers, and supply lines to weaken the enemy's ability to fight. But when you strike the mechanism that chooses the next leader, the message becomes, we don't just want to hurt you, we want to prevent you from replacing what we remove. That's the difference between a tactical strike and an existential pressure campaign. Some versions of the story suggest not all members were present, or that sensitive deliberations were being handled in a dispersed way, with only a smaller group on site. Other versions imply a more direct attempt to catch key figures in one place. But even if the intended target was the building rather than the people, the impact is the same. The process is disrupted, the symbolism is enormous, and the stability of the system is shaken at the exact moment it needs to look unbreakable. Because here's the brutal truth about wartime legitimacy. People can endure hardship if they believe someone is in control. The moment they think no one is in control, fear spreads like fire. Which brings us to the next phase of day 5, Iran's response. Expanding the war beyond Israel. If the strike on the succession process is meant to signal we can dismantle your state, the retaliation appears designed to signal something else. If you widen this war, we can widen it too. And we can take it to places you don't want it. Day 5 features reports of Iran striking targets tied to American diplomatic presence across multiple countries in the Gulf region embassy and consulate-related sites, or compounds near them, depending on the report. Here's why that's so explosive. Diplomatic missions are not American soil in a strict legal sense, but they are protected spaces under international norms. Attacks on them aren't just physical damage, they're political messages with global consequences. It's Iran saying, your influence is not safe, your infrastructure is not safe, and your people in this region are not safe. Whether or not every detail is confirmed, what matters is the strategic logic. Iran wants to make the United States feel the cost not only in military terms, but in diplomatic credibility, regional stability, and civilian risk. And once diplomatic facilities are part of the battlefield narrative, governments have to react. That's how you get evacuation advisories. That's how you get closures of consular services. That's how you get the phrase no government wants to say out loud. Leave immediately. Because when a conflict threatens civilians across an entire region, the war stops being over there and starts becoming a global crisis. And day 5 didn't stop at diplomatic symbolism. It went straight into economics. Markets react when war hits your wallet. War is often explained with maps, but most people feel war through prices. Day 5 includes reports of major market drops, sharp declines at the opening bell, broad sell-offs across sectors, and serious volatility in Europe as well. Because this conflict doesn't just threaten a border, it threatens systems. Energy flows, shipping insurance, airspace stability, regional investment confidence, and the basic assumption that the Gulf remains open for business. When traders start thinking shipping lanes might close, they don't wait to see if it happens. They price the risk immediately. That's why you hear about tanker rates spiking. That's why you hear about insurance stocks dropping. That's why you see airlines, banks, and industrials get hit. And then comes the part that turns a geopolitical story into a domestic political crisis. Gas prices. Reports suggest gasoline prices in the U.S. jumped rapidly in a single day, triggering the exact kind of public anxiety that can change the political environment overnight. Because if the average person hears the Middle East is escalating, it's abstract. If they see the price at the pump jump again, it becomes personal. And if that happens while markets are sliding, the pressure on leaders intensifies instantly. Now, let's talk about the engine driving that fear. Energy infrastructure. Energy infrastructure, the moment the Gulf feels it. One of the most dangerous escalation paths in any Iran-related conflict is the Gulf energy network. Oil refineries, ports, tank farms, pipelines, and the narrow arteries of global shipping. Day 5 includes reports of an Iranian drone strike impacting a major Saudi facility, causing fires and forcing shutdowns or emergency procedures. If true, that's a red flare in the night sky for one reason. Saudi infrastructure is the backbone of global energy confidence. When a major facility is threatened, markets don't just worry about today's supply. They worry about weeks of disruption, retaliation cycles, and the possibility that other sites become targets next. And here's the twist. This also pressures Gulf states politically. Many Gulf governments host U.S. forces, support U.S. logistics, and cooperate with regional defenses. If their citizens start paying the price, if airports get hit, refineries burn, and cities experience repeated alerts, public and elite calculations shift. At some point, Gulf leaders have to ask, how long can we absorb this? And that question connects to another hidden limit in modern missile warfare. Interceptors. Air defense systems don't have infinite ammunition. A high interception rate can be sustained until it can't. If a country burns through interceptors faster than it can replenish them, the risk curve changes dramatically. That's why escalation here is so dangerous. It's not just about who can launch more missiles. It's about who can keep blocking them. Now add aviation chaos to that mix, and the impact becomes global. Airspace chaos, a war that strands the world. When the Gulf becomes unstable, air travel becomes collateral damage immediately. Major hubs are forced to reroute, restrict transit, or shut portions of operations. Flights get canceled or diverted. Passenger safety becomes uncertain. And suddenly you have hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of travelers thrown into chaos, not because they were going to the war, but because their itinerary passed through the region. In modern globalization, the world is stitched together by a few key transit nodes. When one of those nodes gets shaken, the ripple goes everywhere. And while airports struggle, another front opens on the ground. Lebanon. Lebanon, the ground front that changes everything. One of the most destabilizing moves in any Israel-Iran-Hezbollah scenario is a ground push into Lebanon. Because airstrikes can be framed as limited even when they're intense. Ground operations are different. They imply duration. They imply occupation risk. They imply escalation that is hard to reverse quickly. Day 5 includes reports of Israeli forces moving deeper into southern Lebanon, seizing multiple positions described as part of a buffer zone. But here's the problem with the phrase buffer zone. In the Middle East, buffer zones have a history of becoming long-term entanglements. And Hezbollah does not treat them as passive lines on a map. Hezbollah treats them as direct provocation. So while Israel moves, Hezbollah responds drones, rockets, attacks on bases, depending on the day's reports. Then Israel strikes back, hitting dozens of targets tied to Hezbollah's operational network. And once that cycle begins, Lebanon becomes the battlefield again, whether Lebanon wants it or not, which creates a separate political crisis. The Lebanese government has to choose between asserting sovereignty and risking internal conflict, or staying passive while external forces reshape the country through war. Reports suggest unusually direct language from Lebanese officials' statements about not being able to function as half a state, and measures aimed at restricting Hezbollah's armed activity. Those are heavy words in Lebanon. But words don't stop rockets, and checkpoints don't stop escalation once the ground front is active. This is why the conflict feels like it's entering a new phase. Multiple theaters are now active at once. And when multiple theaters are active, errors happen. The fog of war, when allies shoot down allies. Day 5 also includes a chilling reminder that modern warfare is not clean. Reports describe a friendly fire incident involving U.S. aircraft and Kuwaiti air defense's jets downed in a chaotic environment of inbound missiles, outbound operations, and air defenses firing under stress. Whether or not every detail is fully verified, the broader point stands. In a dense airspace with multiple countries operating and multiple threats incoming, misidentification becomes a real risk. And friendly fire incidents are not just tragedies, they're signals of how close the system is to overload. When air defenses are firing constantly, the chance of catastrophe rises for civilians, for allies, for everyone. And while the military system strains, the political system in Washington also starts to strain. Washington, when what's the end game becomes a crisis. A war can be militarily possible and politically unsustainable. Day 5 includes intensifying debate over the legal basis, the scope, and the end state of U.S. involvement. This is where modern conflicts often break. Not on the battlefield, in the question the public demands and leaders fear. What happens after? If the goal is to destroy Iran's military capability, then what? If leadership is removed and succession is disrupted, then what? If the state is destabilized, who fills the vacuum? What replaces the regime, and how is chaos prevented? These are not theoretical questions. They're questions written in blood in the history of modern interventions. And when influential voices start framing the war as someone else's conflict, that can shift the domestic coalition supporting it. Day 5 carries that sense of fracture. Criticism from prominent commentators, pushback from officials, and rising concern that escalation is accelerating without a clearly articulated destination. That's the political danger. Even if the military can escalate, the country may not be willing to pay the price if the endgame remains undefined. Now let's return to the part of this story that no missile map can capture. Iran itself. Iran from the inside. A country is not a regime. Iran is not one voice. It's not a single emotion. It's tens of millions of people with layered feelings: fear, anger, resentment, pride, grief, and exhaustion, often all at once. Day 5 includes reports of mass casualties, overwhelmed hospitals, damaged infrastructure, and strikes impacting civilian spaces. There are also references to cultural damage, historic sites harmed, because in war, even symbols become collateral. And then there are the moments that reveal internal fracture. Athletes refusing to sing. Crowds reacting differently depending on their experience. Some mourning, some cheering, some just trying to survive. When a regime faces external bombardment while internal legitimacy is already contested, the outcome becomes unpredictable. Because pressure can unify a population behind the flag, or it can accelerate breakdown. And if the succession mechanism is disrupted at the same time, the risk grows. That is why Day 5 feels like the day the conflict shifted from strike and response into system collapse risk. Why Day 5 matters. This war now touches everything. Let's summarize what Day 5 signals. The leadership pipeline is under attack. Diplomatic and symbolic targets are now part of the battlefield. Energy infrastructure is exposed. Airspace stability is cracking. A ground theater is expanding in Lebanon. Operational chaos and friendly fire risk are rising. Markets are reacting like this could spiral further. U.S. domestic politics is starting to demand a clear endgame. When all of these happen at once, you don't have a contained conflict. You have a widening crisis. And that's why analysts keep returning to one uncomfortable idea. This war may not have a ceiling because each side has incentives to keep escalating, and each day introduces new vulnerabilities, new pressures, and new chances for miscalculation. What to watch next? If you want to understand where this is going, watch 4 things. Leadership clarity inside Iran. The Gulf's defensive capacity and interceptor endurance. Lebanon's trajectory and Hezbollah's response. The U.S. political endgame, whether leaders define the destination or keep escalating without a clearly stated outcome. Because the endgame question is not optional. Sooner or later, it becomes the whole story. This is day 5. And if day 5 is telling us anything, it's that this conflict is moving faster than normal headlines can explain, and the consequences are already spilling beyond the battlefield into markets, travel, energy, and politics. If you want clear, structured updates that connect the dots without the noise, subscribe to Tin Viet, hit the notification bell, and stay with us because the next day could change the map again.